I'm 68 years old now, and after spending more than 4 decades watching marriages up close, including my own, I finally understood something that most couples never realize until it's already too late. People often think marriages fail because of betrayal, screaming arguments, or dramatic moments that explode overnight. But the truth is much quieter than that. Most marriages don't collapse in a single moment. They slowly fade one small silence at a time. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I spent most of my life living in a quiet suburb outside Cleveland, Ohio. If you asked my neighbors about my life, they would probably describe it as stable and ordinary. I worked for 38 years as a project supervisor at a manufacturing company. My wife and I raised 2 kids, bought a modest house in the late 1980s, and built what looked like a typical American family life. From the outside, everything seemed perfectly normal. But the truth about a marriage is rarely visible from the outside. I met my wife, Angela Carter, in the summer of 1979. I was 25 years old, working my first steady job after a few uncertain years, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Angela worked at a small bookstore near downtown Cleveland. Angela had this calm, thoughtful way of speaking that made people slow down when they listened to her. She asked questions about everything: music, work, family, and she seemed genuinely interested in the answers. That small moment ended up changing the direction of my entire life. Our first few years together felt like the beginning of a long adventure. We didn't have much money back then, but that didn't seem to matter. But those evenings felt warm and full of conversation. We would cook dinner together, sit at the small kitchen table and talk about everything: dreams, fears, and plans for the future. Looking back now, those conversations were the heartbeat of our marriage. But here's something I didn't understand when I was younger. Conversations don't disappear all at once. They slowly grow shorter until you barely notice the silence replacing them. About 10 years into our marriage, life started becoming more complicated. Our son Dylan was born first, and 3 years later our daughter Hannah arrived, filling our home with noise, responsibility, and constant movement. At first we told ourselves it was temporary. "Things will calm down once the kids are older," Angela said one night while washing dishes, her voice calm even though the house felt busy and overwhelming. As the years passed, my job demanded more of my time. The company expanded, and I started managing larger projects. Angela would sometimes start telling me about her day, but I wasn't always fully listening. Then I would sit down in front of the television and let the noise fill the room. At the time, it didn't feel like anything important was happening, but something small was quietly changing. One evening, when I was about 42, Angela tried telling me about a problem she was having with a coworker at the store. I remember sitting on the couch flipping through channels while she talked. After she finished explaining the situation, I said something simple like, "Just ignore her. Some people aren't worth the stress." Angela didn't respond right away. Back then, I thought I had offered practical advice. Years later, Angela told me something that stayed with me. Not because I was cruel, not because I didn't care. Around the same time, one of my longtime friends, Greg Thompson, went through a painful divorce after nearly 20 years of marriage. When we met for coffee a few weeks later, I asked him quietly what had gone wrong between them. He took a slow sip of coffee, stared down at the table for a moment, and said something that stuck with me long after that conversation ended. At the time, I thought he was speaking out of bitterness after the divorce, but as the years passed, I slowly began noticing the same pattern in many marriages around me. Couples who shared houses but rarely shared conversations. Partners who handled responsibilities together but stopped sharing their thoughts. Marriages that looked stable from the outside but felt distant on the inside. Then one quiet evening when I was 56 years old, something happened that finally made me stop and think. Angela was sitting at the kitchen table looking through a photo album filled with old family pictures. The kids had already moved out by then, and the house felt unusually quiet. She pointed to one picture of us standing on a beach in South Carolina. "Do you remember this trip?" she asked. I looked at the picture for maybe 2 seconds. "Yeah," I said. "That was a long drive." Then I walked into the living room. That was my entire response. A few minutes later, Angela quietly closed the photo album. At the time, it didn't feel like an important moment. But now I understand something I didn't see back then. Those small moments are where marriages quietly change direction. Not through big betrayals, but through small absences of attention. A few years later, Angela suggested something that caught me completely off guard. She asked if we could see a marriage counselor. My first reaction was confusion. "We're not fighting," I told her. "I know," she said gently. "That's the problem." Eventually, I agreed to go. The counselor was a calm man named Dr. Leonard Hayes. During one of our early sessions, he said something that completely changed the way I understood relationships. Most marriages don't break because of one big mistake, he explained. They break because emotional curiosity disappears. Then he asked me a question that made the entire room feel silent. "When was the last time you asked your wife a question just because you wanted to understand her better?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because the honest answer was, I couldn't remember. That moment felt like someone turning on a light inside a dark room. For years I had assumed that staying married meant everything was fine, but what I finally realized was this. Love doesn't survive on routine alone. It survives on attention. After those counseling sessions, Angela and I started doing something simple that felt strangely unfamiliar at first. Every evening, we spent 15 minutes talking without distractions. No television, no phones, just conversation. At first, it felt awkward, almost like learning how to talk again after years of silence. But something slowly started changing. Angela began telling stories again. Stories about the bookstore, about people she met during the day, about things she had been thinking about for years but had stopped sharing. And one night, after we had been talking for almost half an hour, she looked at me with a soft smile and said something that I'll never forget. "It feels like I finally have my husband back." That sentence hit me harder than any argument ever could, because I realized something painful. Angela hadn't lost me overnight. She had lost me slowly, through years of small moments when I chose distraction instead of attention. Now, at 68 years old, Angela and I still sit at that same kitchen table most evenings. The house is quieter now, and life moves at a slower pace than it once did. But something important has returned to our marriage: curiosity. We ask each other questions again. We laugh more often. Sometimes we even talk about things that don't matter at all, and somehow those conversations feel more meaningful than anything else. And after nearly half a century of marriage, I finally understand something I wish someone had explained to me when I was younger. Most marriages don't fail loudly, they fail quietly. Not because love disappears, but because attention disappears. And if you're lucky enough to have someone beside you right now, don't wait decades to understand what took me most of my life to learn. Sometimes the difference between a marriage that survives and one that slowly fades is nothing more than the simple act of truly paying attention to the person you love. If this story made you reflect on your own relationships, take a moment today to appreciate the people who matter most in your life. Small moments of attention can rebuild connections in ways we often don't realize. And if you enjoy stories that share real lessons from life, make sure to like and subscribe the video so you don't miss the next one.